Vous utilisez du live action footage et mélangé avec l'animation depuis le début, et votre dernier film fait des allusions très précises à la photographie. Pouvez-vous parler de ça? I want to ask him to talk about the mixture between live action footage and also his interest in photography in the last film.
He did speak some French.
Oui, j'ai parlé français.
Voilà. Oh, j'ai tout oublié.
Bon, alors,
je suis sûr dans deux langues. I'm deaf in two languages. Anyhow, I would like to answer what you said, and maybe I'm going to get it translated for me. Right?
No, I was just I was giving you her question again.
Okay.
But
so live animation. Oh, interest in photography and what goes on. Yeah. Well, that's probably another violation of principles. The abstract world, the allusion to anything outside of painting in those days, back in the 50s, whatever I'm talking about, was unacceptable. And in fact, all the ingredients in the kind of hard-edged painting a la Bazzarelli, who was the head honcho in this gallery that I was involved with, it would be forbidden to make allusions to space. All the construction of these hard-edged paintings had to be architectural and not make allusions to anything else. So when I started doing that with film, I realized that that could be offensive to have, and so I continued to do it, not just to be offensive, but yeah, that was considered. I guess I was interviewed back then, and I remember being quoted saying that blood. That red is red, it can be red, and it also can be blood, and it can be both. There's no reason to keep, isolate the meaning of the color red away from either of those things. And then, so I continued to mix live action stuff, but my compositions are formal and not narrative, because narrative is another whole thing. And of course, that's the base. Most cinema is narrative. It's telling stories, and I thought that as an abstract painter, that wasn't something that I was interested in doing or even capable of doing. So in a way, that I guess was a new. It looked different, that I would mix human figures and without them being involved in narration. And I excuse that because I think that's everybody's experience. If I just walk over here and I have to step around something, that's interrupted an activity that was otherwise continuous. The phone rings and you're in another world. Daily lives are constantly shifting levels of consciousness, right? To small particular things we have to do. We have to eat and then talk to somebody. And if you think about it, it's a constant interruption of continuous thought. Or there can be long periods of nothing but focusing on one thing quietly. Anyhow, that's how I justified and excused the kind of non sequitur that you find in all my films. So maybe it's just a rationalization, okay.
How do you view interpretations of your work, or do you prefer to view your work as sort of?
How do I do interpretation?
Yeah, how do you feel about interpretations of your work?
Oh, how do I feel about interpretations?
Of your work. Yeah.
Oh. Well, if they're positive, I'm delighted. Otherwise, I mean, anybody who troubles to write about them The only negative reviews I've ever gotten, one of them came from an artist you all know who's not here anymore, and I don't know whether to look up or down, but Don Judd took me on one time. He wrote a long piece about a show I had, and this is before I started making my floats moving around. And he objected to the kind of unfocused diversity of my stuff. In a way, he was right, because I was just trying to figure out what I was doing. So I was going from making concrete sculptures to films to little animated things. And so that show that he saw, he stayed there for hours and wrote a long thing about it. But that's the only negative criticism I've ever had. Otherwise, plenty of people stayed away, and I understand that. So how I feel is good. Yes?
So do you plan out your films like shot by shot, or is it something that you just go into and do organically and do stream of consciousness?
I'm going to need, you have a very sweet, soft voice. I'm getting, I'm sorry. Thanks for asking something, but. Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh. Oh. Oh, well, you know, I haven't made any films. The last one is, I realize, is 1953. Is that right? 2003. So I haven't made a film since then.
So did you?
I was doing other works, but not movies.
So,
this?
Did you plan out your films generally?
Oh, did I plan out? Oh, no. You know, no scenario, not at all. No, I'd work to describe the state of suspended criticism when you just do something because you're doing it. And then that leads to another thought, and so that's how I worked. And the films developed, I'd send 100 feet away and get it back from the lab, if I was lucky, a week later, look at that, and that would give me some other ideas, and then I'd go back. And of course I was trying to make a uniform piece finally, and that's what I did, but I didn't want it to die in the process. You know, the process is so complicated making films. That a couple of times I painted right on the films after they were already printed, and that was a mistake. Did we show one tonight?
Yeah. Eyewash. Eyewash?
Yeah, Eyewash was a film that had a soundtrack called Earwash. And that was a protest I made against I think a German film festival that turned down my film because it didn't have a soundtrack. And I thought that was outrageous discrimination, you know. So, but I made a soundtrack for it, this little film, and I called it Earwash, and the image stuff Eyewash. And there's a little anecdote around that because the film, I was coming back to New York. I've been living in Europe, and made this little film Eyewash, and I heard about this festival turning it down. So while I was in New York, I asked my friend Don Allen Pennybaker, he's a filmmaker you guys might know, if he knew somebody. I was looking for somebody to do a soundtrack, and all along I had the intention to put that on a separate film, and we send it to the festival with a separate soundtrack. I had a soundtrack, I couldn't refuse it, but I wouldn't have it disturbing my images. And so I got somebody who, right away, he knew a man, a violinist, and I thought, how strange, a violin to go with my kind of imagery, but why not?